Welcome to the Food Bank Show with me, Steve Bennett, and my family producing the show behind all the computer screens over there. I've done a great job for today, and we're going to do a little bit of a format change today. So all those competitions we do, the food facts, asking you what you cooked the first time, we're going to do those post the interview with today's guest because it is such an important topic that we're going to be covering. I want to dive into it really quickly. But for those that are brand new to the Food Bank Show, thank you for joining us. What do we do? Well, every day at 10 o'clock, my family and I put on this show, and the intention is threefold. One is to help educate the UK about after social distancing, after washing our hands, what's the next best thing as families we can all do to protect our loved one should that virus come knocking on our door. The crux of that is about eating real food, and with some great guests, some nutritionists, lots of great doctors and chefs. They're dialing in, coming on the show, answering your questions. Second purpose is to raise awareness for the food banks in the UK, because right now they need our support more than ever. We'll be touching on that through every single show. And if you would like to donate, and they really need our help at the moment, you can text the number, that way, over there on the screen, or you can go to justgiving.com, find the Food Bank Show, and if you could make a donation, that would be fantastic. The third thing that we're trying to do through all these shows is to look at the positives, because we believe when we come out of this, and we will come out of this, that the world might be a better place. We may have started to think more about how we cut down global warming, and of course with less traffic on the road, we're already starting to do that. We may find that we've changed our eating habits, and the underlying health problem is as serious as COVID, if not even more serious, which is the fact that we have got so many chronic illnesses in our country that are kind of new illnesses that weren't there 100 years ago. So can we cut down chronic illness? Can we save the planet? We're going to focus on the positive throughout the show. Now, let's get straight into today's guest. He's an amazing guy. He has written around 40 books. I've got a few of them with me. The last one I read of his was The Hybrid Diet, which is probably the best health book I've ever read. You must go and buy this. It is absolutely brilliant. But he's not just an author. He has set up several charities, one in particular, the Institute of Optimum Nutrition, which he founded some years ago, and its patron was the late Linus Paulings. And if you've not heard of Linus Paulings, let me tell you, he was the only person ever to win the Nobel Prize twice, unshared. And after that, in fact, when Einstein was once asked, "Are you a genius?" he went, "No, the only genius in the world is Linus Paulings." And Linus Paulings was a mentor and a patron to Patrick Holford, who now joins us on the line, and he's going to tell us all about flu fighting and the research he's been doing in Italy and China. Good morning. How are you, Patrick?
Good morning, Steve. Feeling good.
Good man. Have you had loads of vitamin C this morning?
Oh, actually, you reminded me. I know you've had yours, but I haven't had mine. So I take 2 grams a day, and my vitamin C is actually pink. Because as you're going to learn, it has vitamin C plus elderberry. We'll talk about that, plus zinc, plus ginger. There we go.
Okay, awesome. Well, while Patrick's taking his vitamin C, I prefer mine in a liquid. My wife, like yourself, prefers it in a solid. Talk us through then what you've been doing during lockdown, the research you've done, the book that you've quickly written.
Yes, well, just kicking off a little bit with the amazing Linus Pauling. I met him back in the 1980s, and he was such an incredible genius. We don't realize how much of our life he changed. Actually, one of his Nobel Prizes was for peace, because he took over Einstein's campaigning against nuclear bomb testing. And when the treaty banning globally nuclear bomb testing was passed, he got a Nobel Prize. He did things like, we all knew that ether made you unconscious. Nobody knew how. So he sat down and thought about it and published a paper on the chemistry of unconsciousness. That gave birth to all anesthetics as we know them today. He worked out how a gene can cause disease. He was the first person to do that. He worked out how the environment affects our genes. So in other words, our genes are like dimmer switches that can be turned on or off. And that started a whole new field of epigenetics. I mean, he was an absolute genius. And in the 70s, he came across this extraordinary chemical, vitamin C, ascorbic acid. which, by the way, as we're going to learn, is what we call an antioxidant. Now, all of life is based on oxygen. And as we get really into the whole COVID-19 story, we're going to learn that people are, in effect, dying from a lack of oxygen. And most of them are actually dying effectively from scurvy, that is vitamin C deficiency. That might sound outrageous, but by the end of this talk, you're going to understand exactly why. And he found that vitamin C, a mere 10 milligrams, which is less than you can see. I'm taking 1 gram here. That's 1,000 milligrams. But 10 milligrams, yeah, sorry, the camera's here, yeah. So that's 1,000 milligrams. 10 milligrams will stop you dying from scurvy. And yet 100,000 milligrams is not toxic. And he had never seen that kind of variability. So we run on oxygen, we burn oxygen, we make exhaust fumes called oxidants, and eventually they will kill us. That is why all oxygen-based life has a limit. And it's all this balance between oxygen and oxidants. Too much oxidation, you end up dead. Enough oxygen, you're very much alive. And by the way, that is why when you take your vitamin C every day, as I do, it gives you phenomenal energy. You know, I'm in my 60s. I wake up in the morning. I'm full of energy. It's you know, if anyone out there is tired, just try taking 2 or 3 grams of vitamin C a day and see what it does for you. So Linus Pauling spent the last 39 years of his life studying nothing but the chemistry of vitamin C. He noticed that all animals make vitamin C, all animals except for primates, and that includes monkeys, gorillas, chimpanzees, and us. The guinea pig and another jungle-dwelling rodent called the capybara. Fruit-eating bats, almost all bats, don't make vitamin C. The red-vented bulbul bird, it's a bit like a robin. It's got a red vent. It's very pretty. A jungle-dwelling animal. And also there are 2 fish called the Amazonian ornamental Oscar fish and the teleost fish. They don't make vitamin C either. And what he noticed was that animals that make vitamin C don't generally get colds, flu, viral infections. And they also don't get cancer. So have you ever seen a goat with a cold? You know, a goat makes 16 grams of vitamin C a day. And, you know, 1 gram is 20 oranges worth. Yeah. So a goat sacrifices a ton of glucose, because you make it from sugar, from grass to make all this vitamin C. And the big question is why? And he got fascinated in that. He also found out that when an animal is exposed to a flu or cold or a virus or stress, they massively increase their production of vitamin C. Why? And that's what got him going. He had 39 years focusing on vitamin C. He had 39 years of abuse. People said that he'd gone crazy. He hadn't. He just discovered nutritional medicine. They said he was a crank. Steve, do you know what a definition of a crank is?
Please tell me.
It's a small, efficient tool designed for generating revolutions.
That's absolutely brilliant. Can I just interject 2 things here? Is this not so important to understand that if there's only one person that's ever won the Nobel Prize twice for different things, for him then to change tack completely and dedicate his life to looking into one vitamin, and he wasn't a vitamin salesman, he'd got nothing to gain from it, doesn't that say how important a vitamin is if this genius, the only person in the world that Einstein said was a genius was Linus Pauling, and he dedicated 30 plus years to looking at vitamin C. That's the first point I just want to sort of expand on. Second point I want to expand on there, just so everybody understands this, all species of life, apart from the 6 species you just mentioned, of which us humans are one, actually create their own vitamin C themselves, but it's just us, the primates, the wombat, the guinea pigs, etc., that don't create vitamin C ourselves. Therefore, we have to consume it via our food and our supplements. And all those other species don't suffer from cancer. They don't suffer from colds and flus. Have I got that right? That's what I need to know.
Yeah, in essence. I mean, there are a few, you know, like there's a variation of the coronavirus that can affect horses and cats and so on. But generally, you've got it totally right. And the important point is that a gorilla will eat 4.5 grams of vitamin C a day. Most monkeys are eating 1 to 2 grams. We think that these animals were all jungle-dwelling animals. We could eat a lot. And now we live in a concrete jungle. We eat about 100 milligrams. That's 1/10 of a gram. So you could very logically say, why don't we eat, or why don't we get the amount of vitamin C that our ancestors got? In London Zoo, they feed gorillas 2 grams of vitamin C a day. That's because that's what they need to stay healthy. But what we're going to learn as we get deeply into COVID-19 is that when you're under viral attack, vitamin C is the absolute key. It gets consumed at vast rates. So that 1 or 2 grams that you or I have every day, that's all I have is 2 grams. Some people say that right now we should all be taking 6 grams, which is absolutely fine because there is a lot of virus particles around. But the point is that that amount is completely insufficient when you're under viral attack. And I've spent the last 3 weeks, since lockdown, I basically locked myself down. And I've actually read 300 scientific studies, and I've written a 160-page book, which is at the printers right now. We hope it will go live on Amazon Kindle. You can order it now, or pre-order it. Maybe we could see it. It's called Flu Fighters. And one thing I want to say, I mean, it's fully referenced. I really want people to read this book. And we've dedicated a website, flufighters.net. There's a ton of important information there that obviously is free. One of the chapters in the book, chapter 9, which is called Surviving Respiratory Distress, gives you all the evidence and exactly what you need to do if you do get into an acute COVID situation. And I think that is very, very, very important. We'll unpack this, but I want to tell you right now, there is very good reason to believe that we could cut the number of people going into hospital by at least a third if everybody took 6 grams of vitamin C and 1 gram an hour from the first signs of infection. Now, we already know from the Chinese hospital data, and last night I was Zooming with the doctors in the hospitals in China. And tomorrow I'm talking to the main professor of the hospital in Wuhan, who's running a controlled trial on vitamin C to get the early results. We already know from the Chinese data that vitamin C cut time in the ICU, the intensive care units, by about 5 days. And we already have 5 studies showing that vitamin C reduces time on ventilators by 25%. So as laudable as the work and the courage of all the NHS and ICU teams is, I believe we could halve their workload with a simple, inexpensive, and totally safe vitamin. And I want to explain why this is so. And then the big question, the political question, is why on earth are we not doing this? Why are we actually letting some people die who do not need to?
Yeah, well, maybe we'll talk about drug companies and pharma companies later, I would have thought.
Yeah. So maybe we should get in and unpack the immune system. Yeah.
Let's do it.
So if you look at the next image, basically we have this incredible immune system, and it's our defense is our skin. It's our digestive tract. So, for example, if you make your lung cells strong, vitamin A helps. That really does it. But most importantly, in the bone marrow, we make immune cells, and they're trained up, if you like, into Navy, Army, Air Force, in the thymus, which is in the base of the throat. And they become things like T cells, which attack viruses, macrophages, which gobble up viruses, and so on. So when we look at COVID-19, we'll talk about that. Now, what you're seeing here is a macrophage, which is gobbling up, in this case, bacteria. And you are making 2,000 immune cells every single second. And your ability to make them is completely dependent on your nutrition. So in the next slide, we can actually talk about what happens with COVID-19 and, in fact, any flu virus, because please understand this is part of the coronavirus family. Many colds and flu are caused by the same family. So it's, they have slightly different characters, but we're still talking in the same zone. Now, a virus has these spiky bits, spike proteins, they're called. And there's 2 of them. There's one called hemagglutinin, and it allows a virus to penetrate inside one of your cells. Viruses can't live, forever, virus particles. They've got to get inside one of your cells, take over the DNA control center, reprogram the cell to make more virus particles, and then those virus particles have to break out. and that's done by something called neuraminidase. So drugs like Tamiflu, for example, are neuraminidase inhibitors. Now, vitamin C is a neuraminidase inhibitor. Elderberry, black elderberry, is a hemagglutinin inhibitor. And then what happens is your immune cells, these are your white blood cells, like T cells and macrophages, move in for the kill. They spot the virus, and they effectively, both the virus and the T cells, can use and make oxidants. You know, those dangerous sort of, I mean, you can think of them almost like bullets. So there starts to be a lot of oxidation, and the virus uses that to protect itself. Our immune system uses these. It actually creates something called hydrogen peroxide, which, like bleach, it kind of can help to kill the virus. So what happens is, we know that vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc will actually boost the number and the function of T cells and macrophages. Selenium and zinc also help you to reload more quickly all these sort of important chemicals. And also, once a cell gets infected, it starts to produce something called interferon. So it was a big breakthrough many years ago when we discovered interferon. You can actually get interferon injections. It's a treatment for boosting immunity. It's made in cells that have become infected by a virus to interfere with the ability of the virus to replicate and go on and infect more cells. That is boosted by vitamin C. So at every single stage of the process, you can see vitamin C is terribly important, but also zinc, also vitamin D, also selenium, also black elderberry. There are others, but the point is that your immunity really does depend so fundamentally on nutrition. But there is something unique about COVID-19. Do you want to know about that, Steve?
We do. And just on that, so vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, one of the best things we can be doing at the moment then is getting out, well, obviously eating food rich in vitamin C, supplementing, getting outside in the sunshine, getting some vitamin D because the sun's just started to come out. So not only does that help with the neurotransmitters and serotonin to make us feel good, it will actually help the body produce vitamin D. So even being out in the sun is going to help bolster the defense. Is that correct? It's
totally true. And also exercise as an immune booster, and having good, strong respiratory system is terribly important. Do you know, you might have, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but bats don't make vitamin C, right? Mm-hmm. And the bats seem to have transferred COVID-19 to us. So one of the questions is, if bats don't make vitamin C and they've become infected with COVID-19, why aren't they all, dying of respiratory disease?
And that would be a very logical question.
Yeah. And this has actually been researched, and the answer is interval training. Right. Now, some of you fitness fanatics know that you can get extremely fit if you do short, very high intensity exercise, and then you have a lull, and then you do it again. Now, it turns out that the bat is the only flying mammal. And when it flies, its heart rate goes up to 1,000 beats a minute. Wow. And its temperature goes right up, almost to 80 degrees. And it turns out that this flying mammal has got such an advanced respiratory resilience. Its cardiovascular resilience is absolutely massive. So any respiratory downside of COVID-19 is, it just pats off. It's nothing. Yeah. So that sort of also illustrates that if you've got really good lung capacity and good respiratory strength, that's going to protect you. So the last thing you want to be done is locked down in your house, not exposed to sunlight and vitamin D, not exercising. Yeah. That's and by the way, there's one sort of massive elephant in the room, and that is, we're being sold the idea that the solution is vaccines. And I want to tell you right now, there isn't a single viral flu epidemic that has ever been solved by a vaccine. Not Ebola, not MERS, not SARS, not swine flu, and probably not COVID-19. And the reason, very simply, is a vaccine, it's a reactive response. In other words, you get the infection, you then got to work out how to make the vaccine. It takes you a good 2 years, to be honest, and that's cutting corners and not doing proper safety checks. We have right now an Ebola vaccine going through safety trials. That's 5 years later. If you look at the last 2 centuries, 19th and 20th century, there were 14 viral epidemics that killed in the thousands of people. If you look in the first 20 years of this century, we've had 11 already.
Wow.
So I guarantee you we are going to have more. Yeah. And there's every chance that by the time we have a COVID-19 vaccine, which I'm not against, if there's a good vaccine and it's safe, honestly, I'll have it if I don't have antibodies already. And there's a very good chance that a lot of us will. So I'm not against vaccines at all, but there's a very good chance the next thing won't be COVID-19, it'll be COVID-23 or something else. And do not believe for 1 minute that this is a one-off situation. It's going to occur more. I think that's sort of pretty evident. So the whole point about vaccines is it's based on the idea that if you expose yourself to a virus, you build antibodies, so you have your own immune defense. So if you believe in in vaccines, you believe in your immune defense. And yet absolutely no one in the medical profession in the UK or in the media or the government is talking about how to build your immune defense.
Yeah.
It's not just about not getting exposed, which of course is a good thing. Yeah. We have the ability to build our immune defense. If you don't believe that, you don't believe in vaccines.
Yeah.
And that is the elephant in the room. No one is talking about that. My book is totally about how to boost your own natural immunity with non-toxic nutrients.
Yeah. And again, I remember reading somebody saying that if vitamin C was patentable, then it would be claimed and heralded as the best drug in the world ever. It's just that you can't patent a vitamin or a mineral, therefore the big pharmaceutical companies are not interested. So the answer might have been there all along, how we boost our immune system. And just for clarity's sake, neither of us are saying that we don't believe in vaccines, because without vaccines, many of our children would be suffering from some pretty horrendous things. But what we're saying is don't rely on waiting for it, because if you do believe in vaccines, therefore you believe in the immune system. And if you believe in the immune system, what steps can you do today to start building up your own immunity?
Now, maybe we should look specifically at what COVID-19 does in the lungs.
Let's do that.
Because this is very important. So we've got red blood cells, which contain hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is why we are alive, because it's how we carry oxygen around the body. And we need oxygen to make energy and live. And the way the oxygen is contained, because it's like, a very high octane fuel, is with a special protein called heme, and which is dependent upon iron. And that is why if you're iron deficient, you feel really, really tired. So you've got to have iron, which combines with heme into hemoglobin. That is the whole basis of our life. Now, what happens, if you look at the next slide, is that the virus moves in, attacks the hemoglobin, and invades it, a bit like a Trojan horse. It knocks out the heme and the iron, and it now is sort of cloaked. It's sort of looking like hemoglobin, and it can travel around and now infect more cells. So it uses hemoglobin as its Trojan horse. Now that heme and iron, which is now what we call cell-free heme, floating around the bloodstream. Now iron really oxidizes very quickly when it's not contained, and that's what rust is. Mm-hmm. So you now get this massive oxidation reaction, chain reaction that is occurring. And what happens is this is such a shock to the body that the liver is instantly told to produce these containers to grab all this dangerous iron, and that's called ferritin. So blood levels in COVID-19 people in ICU, ferritin levels shoot up. It's the body trying to capture this very, very dangerous iron. The immune cells, meanwhile, are recycling vitamin C. So in other words, vitamin C can move in and deal with this oxidant. It then gets spent, it changes its form, and the immune cells can turn it from its spent form, which is called dehydroascorbic acid, back into ascorbic acid to work again. But as this keeps going on, what happens is we run out of vitamin C. And these cells are also making something called nitric oxide. And that is essential for the cardiovascular system. So as nitric oxide starts to drop, you get vasoconstriction. So there's constriction of blood vessels in the lungs. You start to have stress on the heart. The liver is stressed, having to make all this ferritin. And eventually the immune system totally panics and goes into a massive hyperreaction, which is called a cytokine storm, producing all sorts of inflammatory chemicals. That's what happens in sepsis or septicemia, induced usually by a bacterial infection. You get this cytokine storm, massive inflammation, bleeding in the, in the lungs, lack of hemoglobin, lack of oxygen, feeling like you can't breathe, feeling like your chest is really tight. This is very, very, very similar to pneumonia. And I'm afraid to say, this is exactly what people are dying from. They're dying effectively from pneumonia, a lack of oxygen, heart failure, or liver failure. That's really what's happening. And at the absolute core of it is running out of vitamin C, because once that vitamin C is spent, immune cells die off. And that's the end of the game. So you can see that it's actually right. I mean, what I'm trying to say here is taking vitamin C is not an adjunct, like a nice thing to do to help the process. People are given cortisone, which is a very powerful anti-inflammatory. Excellent. They're given oxygen to supply more oxygen. Excellent. If they need it, a ventilator, life-saving. But none of these are actually treating the fundamental underlying cause, which is this massive destruction of hemoglobin and oxygen and oxidation. Vitamin C is actually right in the middle of all this.
Why is it, Patrick, and I'm fully with you, fully behind you, everything you said makes sense. Why is it we're seeing pockets of hospitals intravenously giving vitamin C? There's a couple of hospitals in New York. We know certain hospitals in Italy were intravenous vitamin C. We know in Wuhan, a lot of hospitals giving vitamin C intravenously. Why is it in sort of pockets, but why is it not being sort of done en masse, do you think?
I think it's really political. So, you know, first of all, in America, the hospitals are private. And if a ICU expert chooses to do intravenous vitamin C, they'll do it. In China, it's a very different political system. They're actually not under the thumb of big pharma nearly as much as we are here in Europe. And what happened is very early on in Wuhan, they started to trial intravenous vitamin C. I saw the results of the first 50 people given intravenous vitamin C, and there was not one single death.
Wow.
And terribly relevant in this report, this actually wasn't a Wuhan hospital, it was a Shanghai hospital, is that they reported on a man who was effectively dying. His oxygenation index, which is what maybe the most critical measure, was crashing. He was unconscious, he was on a ventilator, and they put in 50 grams of intravenous vitamin C, and they watched in real time his oxygenation index come up. He came out, he came back to consciousness, and he was discharged a few days later.
Wow.
They started to roll this out. The Chinese Medical Association in Shanghai now have this as standard protocol. They actually shipped 5 tons of vitamin C up to Wuhan province. It's dirt cheap. You could give every single person in hospital or ICU in the UK at least 6 grams of oral vitamin C, which works very well, certainly intravenous. You could do the whole thing for less than the cost of 1 ventilator.
My goodness.
Okay, they had not one single safety problem. There is a trial now happening in Italy, in Sicily and Palermo. So they're starting to cotton onto it. But in the UK, particularly, we have this ridiculous and incorrect idea that all vitamin C does is cure scurvy and that it's water soluble and we just pee it out. So there's no point having it. And by the way, I'd like to address that. You're just making expensive urine in the next slide, and we can really look closely at vitamin C.
Before we get there, you said big pharma there, just so anybody that's new to the sort of slang that we use in medical circles. Big pharma, we're not talking about the farmer that's doing a great job bringing up his cattle. We're talking about pharmaceutical companies that once were very, very successful and very rich off tablets, but now losing a lot of their patents, so therefore they are looking for other things to get into, and we believe, we're not sure, but we think the biggest revenue potentially for big pharma companies isn't going to be tablets, it's probably going to be vaccines, and that's why we're just erring on the side of caution. We know many vaccines are very useful, but we're also saying at the same time, while we wait for a vaccine, which may or may not work, or as you've just said, Patrick, it's never been proved with the flu before to work, let's bolster the immune system with things that we can get hold of right now. But of course, big pharmaceutical companies will just always say it's nonsense what we're talking about, because they can't make money out of vitamins and they can't make money out of minerals, because you can't patent something that already exists. And hence probably people say that we're a bit nutcasey, but it seems to be working in China, seems to be working in Italy. And back over to you.
Well, just a few things on that. First of all, it's not that vaccines can't work. They absolutely can. The trouble is they just come too late.
Yeah.
That's the point. So we have to actually be looking at a solution that is not virus specific. That's the point. And vitamin C is not virus specific. It works on every known virus. It works on SARS, MERS, Ebola, HIV. It works on all of them. That has been demonstrated. Not always in the clinical trials that we'd like to have done. They're just not being done. The second thing is it's not any secret. It's in the public domain that the pharmaceutical industry generally cannot make any more money out of what we call blockbuster drugs, like statins was the last really effective blockbuster drug. So they have, there are a lot of statements. I won't mention specific names, but it's not unknown that vaccines is seen as the major revenue stream. And the big issue I have to know, because I've been in this field for over 40 years, I'm actually a psychologist originally, and we saw hidden dangers of antidepressants not disclosed, hidden ineffectiveness of statin. We've seen a lot of things hidden. So the big question is can we trust this industry? And I for example, I noticed at the moment the Corona bill, that's in front of Parliament. Interestingly, it makes vaccines, all vaccines mandatory if the Scottish ministers decide in Scotland. Not in the UK. Says nothing about it. Now, I'm really opposed to that concept. I think that, for example, if a COVID-19 vaccine is developed, is proven effective, and is proven safe, and then really that, us, the public, have to be shown that and persuaded that, then I would perhaps favor a mandatory COVID-19 vaccine. But I don't think the legislation should be passed before it has been shown, because otherwise it's if it isn't mandatory, it's a little bit like guilty until proven innocent. Prove it to us. Show us that it works. Show us that it's safe. And then, as in smallpox was brilliant. It became mandatory, and that was the right thing to do. But the idea of using this kind of shutdown to pass legislation that all vaccines are mandatory is absolutely heaven for big pharma, and is hell for us. We should not allow that. So that's just a little point there on the vaccines. Linus Pauling was absolutely gutted to have discovered this incredibly important substance, and all the ideas that he proposed in science were accepted. He expected to be challenged, a delay. He said normally it took 10 years for a new idea to come into science or medicine. And then some people say it takes 40 years for a scientific revolution. We're about there now. And it is just honestly appalling the way that we have killed vitamin C on the basis of rhetoric. So I'm showing you now, by the way, a slide that is totally accepted, normal stuff. And it's usually the evidence that people say there's no point taking vitamin C. And what it's actually showing is the blood level or plasma level of ascorbic acid, vitamin C, depending on whether you take a low dose like the RDA, 80 milligrams or 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams, all the way up to 2,500 milligrams. And what you can see is for most normal, healthy people, not fighting an infection, not stressed, not exercising, not smoking, you kind of start to drop off in the amount of extra vitamin C in your blood at about 500 milligrams, which already is 10 supermarket oranges and 10 times more than the average person eats. But they often say that it plateaus there. Now, it does level off, you can see that, but it doesn't stop. So even up to 2.5 grams, you're getting more vitamin C in your bloodstream. Actually, most people, that increase will go up to about 5 grams if you're not infected. The minute you're fighting a virus, it's completely different.
Can I just stop you there then? So my 2 grams every morning I take, I'm only getting marginal benefit for the 2nd gram I'm putting in here. The real benefit's in the 1st gram, marginal benefit there. And a bit like we were taught that a goat creates something like 15 grams a day, but when it's ill, creates like 100 grams a day. The time to really up that is when you're defending against something.
Yes, and the critical thing is don't take 2 grams at the same time, because in this study they're taking, for example, 1 gram in the morning and then measuring, the average blood level. So if you take 1 gram in the morning and then you take 1 gram 5 or 6 hours later, because it leaves the body in that period of time, you're going to get 2 spikes.
Got it.
And that's terribly, terribly important. And of course, you will excrete almost all of the vitamin C that you take in the same way that if I drink water, which is a very important nutrient, I got to get it, find the camera. Here we go. Yeah. There we go. If I drink water, I will excrete all the water. Does it mean I shouldn't take water? No, of course not. And actually, if you excrete something, it means you have absorbed it into your blood, because the blood gets filtered by the kidneys and that makes urine. So if you are making expensive urine, you are absorbing it. Point 1. Yeah. Point 2 is that vitamin C is called ascorbic acid. When it's done its antioxidant function and it's spent, it's called dehydroascorbic acid. And what should be done and hasn't been done in these studies is to measure how much of the vitamin C I excrete is spent vitamin C, dehydroascorbic acid, because then I can actually tell how much work my vitamin C has done. Now, if we look at the next slide, we'll start to really understand something this is totally new, by the way. I mean, this is the first time that this has been shown. And this is the work of a friend of mine, Owen Fonerow. This was published on March the 13th. So what's happening here is he's taken a 10-gram gulp of ascorbic acid, and that's the black line. And what you can see is instantly his blood level shoots up. Mm-hmm. So we've got in our stomach, we've got a fast transporter which gets vitamin C into your bloodstream very fast. Now, I'm going to tell people that the very, very, very first sign of a cold or flu, take a 2 or 5 grams straight away, and it will fast track, up will go your blood level. Now, what you see if you follow the black line is it dips down and then it goes up. And then it dips down and then it goes up a little bit. And eventually it peters out. And this is, well, not completely, but this is over an hour. The dotted line, by the way, is something called sodium ascorbate, which is an alkaline version of vitamin C. And we can talk about that. But I quite like immediately to show the next slide, because this is something really, really unique. In this slide, it's the same thing, a 10-gram gulp of ascorbic acid. That's the black line. This time it's being compared to intravenous sodium ascorbate, which is the dotted line. And just looking at the dotted line, you can see that the intravenous 10 grams of sodium ascorbate does raise blood level. It gradually climbs up. Again, this is over an hour, so it works. But the extraordinary thing, and this has not been shown anywhere, people don't understand this, is look at what happens to vitamin C, ascorbic acid. It shoots up in literally a minute. It then drops down. It then goes up. It then drops down. It then goes up. It then drops down. It then goes up, and so on. What this is the vitamin C being spent. It's then reloaded inside immune cells. It's turned from the spent dehydroascorbic acid back to ascorbic acid, put back to work, does its antioxidant function again, gets spent, put back to work, gets spent, put back to work, and so on.
So the cells are recycling it to get the benefit over and over again.
Yeah, and there's nothing else. There are a lot of other antioxidants, but there are none that are recycled in the way that vitamin C is recycled. And the point here also is that I believe that we can get extraordinarily good results by giving ascorbic acid on, every hour, or if someone's really sick, maybe even every half hour. The only side effect of high doses of vitamin C ascorbic acid is that you get loose bowels. And what we know is that when you're sick, take as much as you can tolerate up to the point where you get the loose bowels, which of course for some people is a benefit, and then down some. We call it the bowel tolerance level. And it's amazing. On a normal day, 5 grams is my bowel tolerance level. But if I'm fighting a cold, I can take 30 grams with no problem. So the body will suck it up. It's designed to absorb this. And by the way, the other big myth that you hear is don't take synthetic ascorbic acid made in a factory. You want to, just eat berries, for example, which I love, rich in ascorbic acid. Now, the fact of the matter is every single animal on this planet makes pure ascorbic acid from glucose. There's 5 enzyme reactions inside the body of your dog or cat, or rat or goat or cow, whatever, that turns sugar into vitamin C. And they make tons of it. So in a lab, the way that ascorbic acid is made is in exactly the same process. So yes, it's synthesized in a lab while an animal synthesizes it in their body's biochemistry. But ascorbic acid is totally what we are designed for, and it is the most potent form of vitamin C.
No, that's just fascinating. So I remember you telling me about a year ago that you have a couple of grams a day. Then if you feel a cold coming on, you'll take 1 every hour. And it's fascinating. You're the first person ever told me that, and the word got out. And so many of the doctors that I work with do the same themselves. And of course, many of the GPs are faced and exposed to more colds and flus because of the patients coming into the surgery. And some really good friends of mine have taken that advice and literally will take a 1 gram every single hour. As soon as they start coughing and sneezing, sniffling, and the results have just been fascinating. And in fact, ever since I've been sort of taking a lot of vitamin C, my children will tell you, they just go, "Dad, you're just indestructible." I don't think I've coughed, sneezed, other than a bit of hay fever, for how long, kids? 4 or 5 years?
Oh, easily.
Yeah, they all get really frustrated with me. Oh, there's Dad again. The whole house might come down. And most of the kids have vitamin C now, but they're not into this really taking 1 every hour when they get a cold. No. They will be now, they said, after your program. Jack, say hello to Patrick. For those who haven't seen my children, 3 of them
Hi,
are
Jack.
Directing today's show.
Yeah.
He gone camera shy? There they are. So there's Jack,
Hi,
Jesse,
kids, how you doing?
and Tom.
Hi, Patrick.
Excellent. Yeah, you listen to me, not your dad.
No, don't worry, I don't.
They don't listen to me. I've always said the 2 groups of people the hardest to help, your kids, but even worse than bringing up your kids are bringing up your parents. Bringing up your parents is so difficult.
Now, I do want to say that you and I we're a little older. I'm in my 60s. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've never taken a day off work. I think I have had maybe 3 viral infections that have lasted more than 48 hours. Most have gone in 24 hours. But as you get older, your cells are a little bit less efficient. You have more oxidation going on. That's why we get wrinkly. And you need more antioxidants. And vitamin C is the primary antioxidant, but it's not the only one. So if you think of the oxidant like a fire, vitamin E is like a fireproof glove, as is vitamin C. And what happens is the antioxidant gets oxidized. Mm-hmm. And it then has to be reloaded and put back to work. And coenzyme Q does that. Something called alpha-lipoic acid does that. Anthocyanidine, cyan means blue. This is all the blueberries. Mm-hmm. So when I decided when I hit 50, I also supplement a antioxidant formula that contains all of these. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we want to eat as many of these as possible. In the next slide, what you want to be doing is eating all these really multicolored foods. So, turmeric and mustard and ginger and carrots and butternut squash and blueberries and, asparagus and avocado and beetroot and blackcurrants and, really pack in all those very important foods. So
I'm smiling because every day on the Food Bank show, we put a food fact up. And it just so happens, and this is not planned, it so happens that today's food fact is about the Fab 4 berries
Yeah.
because the raspberries, the blueberries, the blackberries, the strawberries, they are so rich, aren't they, in antioxidants?
They totally are. So increasing all these antioxidants, and of course I have to say this, smoking is such a destroyer of vitamin C. If you're worried about COVID-19, this is a phenomenally good time to stop smoking because it is just a killer. I mean, every single puff of a cigarette is 1 trillion oxidants.
Wow.
It's an extraordinary thing. We don't yet know why. There's almost twice as many men dying as women from COVID-19, and we don't exactly know why. It's something I'm really exploring at the moment.
I've been doing a bit of research on that. So if you look at China, look at Italy, there were 2.7 underlying conditions on average, and the main two seem to be high blood pressure and diabetes type 2, which when you study the graphs, for some reason, men seem to be more diabetic than ladies. And also tend to have a higher blood pressure. And the good thing there is that the underlying causes of both of those could be related to food. And of course, making changes to your diet can make a real impact on your immune system quite quickly, can't it?
Oh, it's a very good point. The other thing I don't know if you picked up on, which is extraordinary, is according to Worldometers, which is where we get all the data from around the world, they basically looked at 126,000 deaths. And there is not one in any child under the age of 9. And we know, sadly, there was a 5-year-old in the UK who died who had underlying health conditions. That exactly what that is has not been revealed. There was a study yesterday in the Journal of American Medical Association from Spain. They again had found exactly the same thing. Children do suffer from this, and some, a very, 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 very low percentage, go into ICU. And in this study in Spain, it ended up as I think 4 needed some respiratory support, and only one of those had only one underlying health condition. So the extraordinary thing right now, as far as I'm aware from all statistics, and I'm also in touch with what's called the Intensive Care National Audit and Research Team in the UK, as far as I'm aware, there has not been a single COVID-related death in an under 9-year-old anywhere in the world in a healthy child. And that's very encouraging. The other thing that is extraordinarily different, for example, to viral pneumonia, is a very, very, very low rate in pregnant women. Right, and so the question is, why are pregnant women seemingly protected? Why are young children protected? And one thing we do know is that both of those groups have very high levels of melatonin, which is the hormone, the neurotransmitter that helps us to sleep. And children have a very high level of that. They also have a very active thymus. That was the gland near your throat that matures all the immune cells. So there is some thought that melatonin may be helpful. But we are now, when you talk about melatonin, you're also talking about day-night cycle, how we are connected to the earth. So we really have to talk about vitamin D. Yeah. Can we say a little bit about vitamin D?
I'd love you to, yeah. It's one of my favorite subjects.
So let's look at the next slide. This is the average blood level of vitamin D through the year. And what you're seeing is that it starts to really fall from October, hits rock bottom in January, February, March. And then only now is the angle of the sun sufficient to actually make vitamin D. Vitamin D is made from exposure to sunlight. So, when you get to January, February, we're really at a very exposed level of low vitamin D, and vitamin D is vital for immunity. If we look at the next image, you're going to see when flu strikes the most. So this is the peak months for flu. Comes in December, then January, and then very, very big spike in February. And of course, this coincides with our lack of vitamin D. Now, vitamin D we know is terribly important. In an ideal world, we would all know vitamin D level, and I hope that everybody going into hospital ICU is having their vitamin D level checked. We measure it differently to the Americans in something called nanomoles per liter. But basically, most people in February are hovering around 30 units. You've got to be above 50, ideally above 75, and optimally at 100. Now, vitamin D is not like vitamin C. Like, if I pop it every hour, is it going to get rid of a cold? It doesn't work like that. And I honestly believe that if you have a level of vitamin D above 75 or at 100, probably you need to do nothing more because it stores in the body and it's there. But there are 2 studies, and this is in my free chapter on flufighters.net, chapter 9, which did give people with pneumonia very, very high doses of vitamin D just for 5 days. And they showed that it bumped up their vitamin D level to that optimum level, which is about 100 units. And it's completely safe to do this. So just 5 days, very, very high vitamin D. And of course, if you don't have low vitamin D, I don't think it's going to benefit you. But if you do have low vitamin D, it may do. And these 2 studies found that people recovered from pneumonia quicker and were discharged quicker. So I think vitamin D is important. A lot of people in Britain, without knowing it, have almost pathologically low levels of vitamin D. And by the way, yes, you can eat it. And of course, you can supplement it directly, which is how you get it up. But the primary source of vitamin D is sunlight.
Yeah.
Not food, it's sunlight.
Yeah. And
so get outdoors and get your kit off.
Yeah, well, that's so true, isn't it? And in my book, I wrote that...
keep 2 meters away.
Yeah, keep 2 meters away, absolutely. In my book, I wrote that the sun has been, sunbathing has been demonized for so long, but when you actually look at the studies, and there's so much evidence that more people would die of not having enough sunlight, even from cancers related to not enough vitamin D, than we'll ever get from skin cancer. So my advice is simply this, and my kids I apologize to, because for years on holiday, before they went out in the morning, I'd put suntan cream on first thing. You can't go out for half an hour. Then we'd go out. Well, you get no vitamin D. Now we've learned, and the kids will tell you, every time we're on holiday, they go out in the sun, and we know roughly each child when they would have too much sun, when they would burn. They're all a bit different. And way before that, we bring them in, and then we know they've got plenty of vitamin D. So it is crucial. In fact, even the NHS say everybody should be supplementing in the UK in the winter. And just for layman's speak, just so everybody understands what you're saying, vitamin C and all the Bs are water soluble. The body doesn't store it, so you need to keep replenishing the Bs and C. But vitamin D, the body, because it's not water soluble, the body can store it. And there's loads of research about how long the body can store it.
And to give you a good, sort of guideline, if you're thinking, how do I do this? What do I do? If you go into a health food shop, you'll see a lot of vitamin D supplements which give 1,000 IUs or 25 micrograms. And you can get this as drops, for example, where 1 drop is 1,000 IUs. And that is a very good level to take every day. But the point which you're making quite rightly, Steve, is that actually if you took 7 drops once a week, it's just as good. Yeah. Because it stores in your body. Yeah. So vitamin D is certainly, something you definitely want to get up. And by the time you're getting vitamin D and vitamin C and antioxidants and not smoking and also not panicking, this is really important because a state of stress, when the body perceives an emergency, and by the way, when you watch the news and then you panic, then your body is sort of reacting with what we call the fight-flight syndrome. So it thinks you're about to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. It channels all your energy into running and fighting. So your pupils dilate, your breathing changes, and you shut down immunity. So a very, very big depressor of immunity is being permanently in a state of stress and panic. And one of the things I have to say, at one level, I do think that this whole lockdown process has been handled rather brilliantly. The message has been clear. I think vast majority of people have been very, very compliant. But I do think, and I hate to say this, but the UK right now has one of the worst death to survival rates. And, China is very good. South Korea is very excellent. And I think we have to ask, not just, how do we respond and get people into ICU and how many ventilators have we got and all that sort of stuff. We've actually got to be saying, what are we actually doing? When most people, over 80% who get the COVID-19 flu, it's no big deal. They will recover naturally and it's fine. But there's a small percentage who don't. And we have to ask, what to do about that. And I think that, there is this great danger that we're being driven into a state of sort of utter panic, where we throw our hands up and we go, how long are we actually going to be in lockdown? I'm waiting. In the next 2 weeks, we're going to get the first antibody studies. This is important because these are cross-section studies to see how many people in the UK already do have antibodies. And, if, for example, 50% of the sample already have antibodies, then we're in exactly the same position that we would be with the normal flu epidemic, which is that when a majority of people have the antibody, it sort of fades away. And that's what happened in Wuhan. Remember, yesterday, there was not one single death in China. The day before, on Tuesday, there was
Can I stop you there, Patrick? Because you've been speaking to people daily and doctors daily in China. The one thing people keep saying to me, friends and family, oh, that's just bullshit. It's the government are suppressing the real data, the real figures. Do you actually believe that they've got it under control?
No, I know they do. And for example, if you go to flufighters.net, I did a podcast with Dr. Richard Cheng, and he was very upfront and said that, the official death toll in Wuhan was 3,300. He said, we know that that's not true. And, the government has basically endorsed that as such. And what they've been doing is counting the number of urns, coming out of the 7 mortuaries in Wuhan, and it looks like the death toll was probably 10 to 20,000. So, here is a man in China saying that's probably the more realistic sum. Of course, it's always hard to report these figures. I mean, now the Chinese government are saying, please be honest. We cannot hide anything here. We have to know what the facts are. But of course, did someone actually die from COVID-19, or did they die from something else? And, as everyone's scrambling to deal with this situation, there's a lot of variability in the statistics. Now, I said to him, and this was last week, how many people have died in Shanghai? He said 3. So Wuhan is in the province of Hubei, which is about 500 miles away from Shanghai. And they shut down the whole province. No one could leave that province. Right now, if you want to get into China, all flights to Shanghai, every single person is triaged, is inspected to find out what they've got. So they did this, and they shipped 5 tons of vitamin C up to Wuhan. So
That's
yes,
amazing.
I do trust this.
That's good.
And we should be asking them, what have you done? What have you found? That's worked.
Yeah, because they're ahead of us. Right, I'm just going to, if you don't mind, give you some questions from the public that are asking questions on YouTube. Before we do, I just want to agree with something massively you said then, that stress is a real contributor to this, and if you've got it, makes it even worse. And therefore, do turn off the news. At the end of the day, if you are social distancing, if you are washing your hands, if you're then taking your vitamins, eating good nutrition, you're doing everything you can, turn off the news, read a book, let's get a good night's sleep, because you need to be as de-stressed as possible at the moment. Right, let's turn to YouTube, and some questions coming up. Ian Lake, who's a doctor that we had on earlier in the week, it says, enjoying the show, read vitamin C and its antiviral properties. Most people think of fruit juice as a good source of vitamin C. There is evidence of glucose inhibiting vitamin C absorption. So what he's saying is, actually don't rely on it in the juices, I think. Is that right?
Well, something interesting here. Ascorbic acid is acidic, and it actually has to be absorbed in an acidic environment, the stomach. So where does nature put the most vitamin C? And the answer is into citrus fruit. That's citric acid. So actually, a citrus fruit does help the absorption of vitamin C, and I don't think the glucose is going to be terribly bad. But the problem is that if you're inactive, as we are, and you eat 20 oranges, which a gorilla does, you will be getting way more glucose than you need. That's the point. So you are, in fact, better, unless you happen to be a marathon runner, not eating 20 oranges, but supplementing a gram of vitamin C, just getting on with it.
Absolutely. Next question comes from India, and from an Iftikhar, says, good morning, Steve and Patrick. Thank you for doing this program. During the self-isolation, Namaste. And I and my family do some yoga exercises related to making lungs stronger and intake vitamin C and vitamin D. A quick thought, because we've got so many to get through. Yoga helping?
I would think so. What we do know is more in studies on Tai Chi, but exercise that generates vital energy, and I would definitely include yoga in there, has actually been shown to have very positive effects on the immune system, more so than, hard, heavy pumping, gym type work. So I would say that both Tai Chi and yoga are very good for immunity.
Brilliant. Lee says, morning all, I am on immune suppressant as a guinea pig. Professor's words, not mine. Not active due to other issues. I don't feel meds are working. This is amazing info. Thank you so much. And then Angela says, this is the single best explanation of the virus I've heard throughout this. I, for one, am taking my vitamin C religiously. This program is so enlightening. Thank you very much. Nicholas says, in your opinion, if I supplement with vitamin C, shall I have it one go or should I space it out? I think you've already answered that one. Space it out, because we see these spikes. You taught me a lesson there, because I take 2 in the morning, and then whenever I fancy it, because I love the flavour in my effervescence, I take it when I feel like it, but I'm going to be a bit more religious. I'm going to now separate it throughout the day. Alita says, taking a high dose of Primal C daily, Vit D, this is great information. Chris Patterson from the Public Health Collaboration is an ambassador, says, this is fascinating. My question is, how do the more famous carnivores, such as Sean Baker, if you don't know him, is a doctor that eats nothing but meat, how do the likes of Sean Baker not end up with scurvy? I guess he's probably, do we get vitamin C through meat?
A little.
So he's probably supplementing.
A little, well, let me just explain here that we're talking about getting a gram of vitamin C, 1,000 milligrams. There is an iron cast evidence that 500 milligrams reduces risk for many diseases, cardiovascular and so on. So in other words, if one was really conservative but science-based, you could undeniably argue a case for everyone to get 500 milligrams. You only need 10 milligrams to not get scurvy.
Yeah.
And this guy who's eating meat and some veg, I presume, or just meat, maybe.
Yeah, Sean Baker is, as far as I know, is a doctor that's doing an experiment. I don't know how long he's been doing it. I think it's over a year. Nothing but meat. Yeah.
Well, I mean, meat will have some, because unless he's unless he eats guinea pigs. Do you remember the last guy said, I'm a guinea pig on this drug? Well, why the guinea pig? And the answer is, we use the guinea pig as the experimental animal because, like us, it doesn't make vitamin C.
I never knew that. I never knew that.
If this meat eater was eating guinea pigs and fruit-eating bats, very popular, we understand, in some parts of China, and monkeys, they would not get vitamin C.
Yeah.
Because those animals don't make it, right?
Yep.
But if he's eating cows and goats and sheep, etc., those animals make vitamin C, and therefore it's in their blood, it's in their immune systems. So of course there's vitamin C in meat. There just isn't very much.
Thank you for that. That's great advice. I've learned something. Again, I keep learning from you. It's brilliant. I'll have to pay it back someday. Where are we? Samuel says, can certain medications deplete vitamin C levels?
Yes, they can. But I wouldn't really worry too much about that. One of the amazing things about vitamin C is it's virtually not contraindicated with any drugs. If you are on serious immune suppressant drugs, you should have a chat with your doctor about that. But really, otherwise, there is no contraindication. So yes, there may be some drugs that deplete it a bit, but don't worry. If you're taking a gram or two, the drugs is not going to interfere with its ability to function at that level.
Brilliant, thank you. Chris Patterson has said, I've just bought my wife a medical narrowband UVB lamp as she's clinically deficient in vitamin D. That's a
fantastic,
great way of going.
Yeah.
Poppy says, there are some interesting studies on omega-3 and immune boosting properties. What are your thoughts on fish oil for helping to ward off illnesses?
No, it's absolutely true. And there are other nutrients. Vitamin A is very important. There's plenty that we haven't covered. But the ones that we have covered are the ones where there are clinical trials of giving specific amounts and actually reducing the severity or duration of colds or flu. And in my book, I do talk about, these other nutrients as well. And I so want to get the message about vitamin C across.
Yeah.
I hope that the legacy of COVID-19 will be the removal of this ridiculous block on what is truly one of the most important biological, natural chemicals discovered that is not only going to help us with this particular pandemic, but I guarantee you there will be more. Because in essence, I believe, this cannot be proven, that we have messed up the ecosystem. And in my book, by the way, there's a mineral selenium, and there is reasonably good evidence that every single pandemic has occurred in an area where the selenium deficient level is low. We know that animals who have low selenium, viruses can mutate, and that's what we've got, viral mutation. So selenium is very important. So maybe we've messed up the ecosystem. It's kind of fascinating. We've got 4.3 billion diabetics in the UK. We know that this is hitting most hard those people who don't have immune resilience, who are also, if you like, their ecosystem is messed up. And I don't think that these two things are disconnected.
Yeah.
We've just been doing the wrong thing with our food, with our soil, with our agriculture. Yep. Wuhan is a very, very populated city. It's a very polluted city. There's a lot of poor nutrition there. It was a perfect, place for a virus like this to strike first.
Yeah, absolutely. And people don't realize that actually before it hit Hunan, there was protests for months and months about pollution, and it is one of the worst polluted cities.
And before we end, when I get angry, and I do sometimes, and depressed, because there isn't an hour. I was talking to China at 1 o'clock last night. There isn't an hour in the last month where I haven't been, contacting some MP or chief medical officer, or, just trying to get the word out there. But I always learned in my work, never make someone angry unless there's something they can do about it. So whenever I get angry, I try to express it. So I've written a poem. It could be a rap. Would you let me read it to you?
I would love you to read it as a great sign-off.
All right, okay.
And before you read it, can we get you back on the show sometime next week? It's been fascinating.
Of course. And by the way, I'm talking to an absolutely brilliant biochemistry wizard called Doris Lowe in my next podcast. After that, I'm talking to Professor Harry Hemmeler, who has spent 40 years studying the science on vitamin C. Brilliant. Nobody knows the subject better than him. He wrote to the British Medical Journal. He wrote to the Lancet to publish a letter telling doctors the irrefutable evidence of what they should be doing. Both of these UK medical journals refused to publish his letter, considering it rather irrelevant in the current climate. So we have to break this block. Vitamin C sales are going up massively. So the public knows something that the doctors are not paying attention to. And so here goes the poem.
Okay.
It's called COVID Operation. It will be solved by science, they say, and totally ignore it when it stares them in the eyes. Like an elephant frightened of a mouse, vitamin C is demonized by a pack of lies. Control the disease, the cure, the people, the rhetoric. Vaccinate half the population, 4 billion doses. That's a lot of spondulics. Control the use of COVID in all communications. Looks like we're going to need a covert operation. With hidden messages like C4UK, 6G a day keeps the plague at bay, or CIMED-NAP turns a pandemic around. That's the word pandemic. It's quite likely we're going to have to go underground. Vaccines are coming. You won't have a choice. Remember, fear is the major prisoner of your voice. Keep talking and sharing, thinking and caring. People's lives are being lost because we're ignoring the evidence. Kick some ass, get vocal. Don't just sit on the fence. Follow the logic, not the money. Use common sense. Not common these days, but hey, what's new? Things can change for better or worse. Don't let the old be the new. Is COVID a blessing or is it a curse? Think of all the plus sides of nature. Turning it off and on again usually works. For sure, we're heading for a digital universe. When given option A, men went for B. I'd like to propose a new option C. Let's C4UKing fight for it so they don't die from it before we all get fried by 5G.
That was fascinating. Hey, your rap that you did last year, Big Pharma Man, can I put links to it? Because that's a fascinating rap.
Please do. Yeah, patrickholford.com/drug wrap. Do go to flufighters.net. There's a ton of information there for you. Do get that sample chapter. Send it to everybody you know. We really have to turn this thing around. And, we have the power. This is going to be a grassroots revolution, thanks to people like you, Steve, putting it out there.
Patrick, thank you. Children, let's have a round of applause for Patrick. Mate, you were absolutely amazing. And we can't wait to have you back on the show. God bless you. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Everybody, that was the incredible Patrick Holford. All his books are worthy of a read. The last one I read was The Hybrid Diet. That is a fascinating, fascinating book. We have to sign off right now. But before we do, in fact, my children are waving at me. Let's quickly do some quick mentions. Don't forget, this is all about trying to raise awareness. And that way, we need your donations for the food banks, the Trussell Trust. We need to support them. We need to help them because more than ever, there are people going hungry in the UK. Please make your donations either with a text or go to justgiving.com. We also every day do a food fact, and it just so happens that today's is the berries, totally by coincidence, because Patrick loves berries because they're full of antioxidants. So one of the things, yes, take your vitamin C, yes, get out in the sun, vitamin D, we just heard selenium and zinc, very important for us too. You'll find those in many good multivitamins. Also, though, get out in the sun, and then eat loads of fresh berries because fresh berries, and try, but it doesn't have to be fresh actually, frozen are just as good, but try and go organic. What did you cook for the first time yesterday? Well, we introduced a new thing at home yesterday. We've decided, because we've got 4 children that can cook, and my wife and myself, we've set up into 3 separate teams. We're now doing, so it's myself and Tom over there did yesterday. Tonight is Jack and Lily, I think, and then tomorrow night is my wife and Jess, and we're having a competition. Last night we did cook for the first time. We did a pineapples with sweet and sour inside, and it was absolutely amazing. And we've got a scoring system. We're doing 1 out of 10 for how healthy it was. There it is. That's my pineapple last night. 1 out of 10 for how healthy it is. 1 out of 10 for presentation. Hence, I made a big attempt there at the presentation. And 1 out of 10 for what it tastes like. And we're all scoring each other. And and we did a starter which wasn't as healthy yesterday. I must admit that scored badly on the first point. But we did quite well, didn't we, Tom? Our points were quite high.
Yeah, it was 211 out of 200.
In fact, there's Tom just finishing the prep to go into it. Bless you, Tom. So what did you cook for the first time yesterday? Something we're asking. We won't reveal yours today. We will tomorrow. We're short on time today. God bless you all. And no, we'll leave the sugar facts till tomorrow, I think. Thank you, everybody, for joining the show. A massive thank you to Patrick. And please, 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 this will be up there in a moment as a recording. Please share it with everybody. It's such important information, especially around vitamin C. God bless you all. See you all tomorrow.